Welcome back, everyone. Attorney Craig Steger, and I'm the farming lawyer. I wanted to talk today about something that I think has been in the news recently, and I've had some interesting conversations with people about the question about who's a better or safer driver, a farm kid or farm truck driver who grew up just learning, or someone who got their commercial driver's license. And I have found in talking to people that there are strong feelings on both sides of that issue. There's definitely people that think that farm kids, say men and women who grew up driving truck on the farm, tractors and things like that, are going to be better, safer drivers than those that, let's say, just got out of trucking school, just got their CDL. And then there are those that think that on top of that, having the actual training, going through the classes, taking the test is going to make you a safer driver overall. Personally, I probably fall into the latter category, but maybe I'm a little biased. Now, I have the perspective of both sides. So I grew up farming and around farming as a kid. I drove a lot of tractor, drove a lot of pickup trucks, trailers, some grain trucks, straight grain trucks. I never drove a semi, but had plenty of experience driving on road and off road in fields, big equipment, and so I have that background, I have that experience. But I also have just recently finished trucking school and obtained my Class A commercial driver's license, so I sort of have that kind of recent. And I could definitely say, even with my driving experience that I had before, I learned a ton about just how to safely drive, how to safely inspect semis, straight trucks. And in fact, one of the main reasons I got my commercial driver's license is I wanted to be able to more safely drive the school bus that we have and that we're renovating as a sort of a camper or travel bus for our family. Even though I wouldn't need a commercial driver's license to drive it, I felt like it was the smartest and safest option for us because it's 40 feet long and has air brakes. But so the question is, well, in most states, let's say, for example, in Wisconsin, and I think this is also true in Iowa and Minnesota and a lot of states, is there are oftentimes exemptions, ag exemptions for farmers, farm employees, family members, if they're driving trucks, semis, whatever, as long as they're just hauling their own goods, cattle, manure, crops, whatever, as long as they're not doing it for hire, you can, in most states, under certain circumstances, legally drive that equipment without a commercial driver's license that would, in all other circumstances, require someone like me to have a commercial driver's license to operate that. And there's obviously, I think there's obvious reasons for that. They didn't want it to be cost prohibitive for farmers. They wanted to encourage farmers to be able to scale up and do the things necessary. Farming has changed a lot since I was a kid. When I was kid on the farm, 40 years ago, I didn't really know anyone that had a semi, even a straight truck. The only truck that I saw was the milk truck that came in, and that was always a straight truck. And those guys, I think, pretty much always had a CDL license. But no one really had trucks when I was a kid, and then that's all changed. And now here we are in 2025, and it's almost unheard of for any kind of decent sized farming to be done without a truck of some sort, hauling silage, hauling manure. Those are kind of the big things, hauling hay. And, certainly it's been much true for a much longer on, let's say, more of the grain farming, corn and bean farms. I think trucking has been part of it for much longer, but even then that is scaled up considerably from, let's say, small gravity box to huge, grain carts now. So everything is scaled up in terms of size. And farms have gotten bigger. Farmers are having to haul farther. Maybe you're taking your corn and beans to the mill. Maybe you're taking it to an ethanol plant, whatever the case may be. And you're driving vehicles that for everyone else you could not legally drive that, and it would be a serious offense, maybe even criminal, for someone else to operate that vehicle on the roadway. So I think there's legitimate arguments on both sides of whether it's a good idea for that ag exemption to exist as it typically does, and to the extent that it does, in as much as you're not even required to be 18, at least in Wisconsin, to legally drive a farm truck. But the question I want to talk about today is a little bit different from that. And this question is like, who's actually the better driver? Who is safer? I think those are two different questions about whether it should be legally required. But I think who is actually the better driver? And I have heard a lot from, especially from farmers, maybe almost exclusively from farmers, that they'll say someone that has grown up or has experience driving truck in the farming industry is as good, if not better, driver, and many will say a better driver than, let's say, the average person that's driving with a commercial driver's license. And I actually think there's some truth to that. And here's how I approach it. Having just gone through trucking school and learned to drive a truck that I was driving was never going to go off road, right? And I think a lot of over the road truckers are fortunate in that they're typically driving on large highways that are made for commercial motor vehicles. They're pulling into, let's see, warehouses or stores or things like that, shipping depots that are designed for semi-traffic. Trucking stops, rest areas are all designed for that type of traffic and to allow them to get on and off safely. And so I definitely think there is something very different about the average day-to-day driving of, let's say, an over-the-road trucker versus, let's say, a farm trucker. And I think sort of in between that is what I would say the local truck traffic. Whether it's delivery trucks, feed trucks, milk trucks, dump trucks, they're kind of doing a little bit of both. But what's really unique about the farming side of things, whether it's, let's say, a grain truck hauling corn and beans, or let's say more of a dairy, you're hauling silage, hay, manure, especially on the dairy farming side of things, you're in and out of fields all the time. And in fact, this is something that's very different from when I was a kid. When I was a kid, we were chopping corn. You had a tractor, you had a chopper. Probably, I think we may have still had a 1-row corn chopper when I was a kid, but a 2-row corn chopper, maybe a 4-row if it's really big. And you're pulling a wagon behind it, and then you're hooking and unhooking the wagons, and you're pulling those wagons to the farm, whether it's on the road or not, with a tractor, right? And I think a lot of us grew up driving that. And I think it's a good skill to have. And I think in some ways it does help prepare you for driving truck, but they're still very different. The speeds are different, the size is different, the brakes are different. But now it's almost unheard of to see anyone chopping corn that way, except for the very small dairies. And everything now is pretty much done with large self-propelled corn choppers, and they're chopping, the truck is driving directly behind or directly side by side with the chopper, and they're dumping right into the truck, and then the truck is all going away, pulling out onto the highway, going to the farm, usually dumping out the back end onto a large pile where they're putting them on in bunkers and things like that. So a lot of off-road driving, I think it certainly takes skill and experience to be able to do that, be able to drive out on, let's say, hills, muddy fields. You're driving side by side with a big chopper, and you don't want to hit the header and do damage. And so I think there are definitely parts of that I would say the average over the road trucker probably wouldn't be able to do. So I think definitely farm kids are going to have a leg up when it comes to the off the road, and even, let's say, getting on and off the roadway, using the field approaches, getting on and off the roadway. I think there's definitely value there when it comes to having that farm experience, especially if you grew up on the farm. But then what happens when you're out on the road? What happens when you're driving 55, 60 miles per hour down the state highway, and then you're just out on the road and you're sharing it with everyone else, and then now your job is to make sure that you're paying attention, you're keeping the stopping distances that you need to, that you have time, you have distance to stop. And this is where I think the advantage of the farming experience tends to wear off. And I think the CDL training and license and experience driving trucks on the road really makes a big difference. Because there's a number of things that I really learned going through trucking school that I would not necessarily have figured out on my own if I'd have just gotten into a truck and started driving for a farmer. Probably maybe the biggest thing, and I think a lot of truckers, both CDL and non-CDL probably don't do it very well, don't do it thoroughly, but just doing a very complete pre-trip and post-trip inspection of your truck, knowing how to look for damages. Are your tires properly inflated? Do they have cuts and tears? Are they bulged? Are your air brakes working right? Are they leaking? Are your lights all working? Do you have the right tread depth on your tires? All that kind of stuff is stuff that you probably don't learn, and I'm guessing don't spend a lot of time thinking about if you just grew up driving farm trucks. And let's be honest, if you're driving a semi and trailer in and out of fields, you're on rocks, you're in mud, your equipment is probably getting much more heavy abuse than if it was just out on the open highway. And I think it's all the more important to be doing thorough inspections of your vehicles when you're operating them under those conditions. And I have the same thought for like dump trucks where you're doing a lot of on road and off road. You're in dirt, rock, gravel, muddy conditions, all that kind of stuff. I think inspections are all the more important if you're driving much off road as compared to the over the road truckers. But learning how to do a inspection, knowing all the fundamental parts of your truck, tractor, trailer, especially if you have air brakes, that's I think something invaluable that I got out of the CDL experience. I think probably a second one is just following distances, knowing how long it takes you to stop, how much space to give between you and cars ahead of you. I will say this is just from personal observation. It's been my experience that farm trucks tend to be, I would say, on the very aggressive side in terms of following distances, pulling out into traffic. And I get it. I get it. You're in a hurry. You're trying to stay ahead of the chopper. You're trying to get that bunk filled. There's urgency there. But that urgency, I think, tends to encourage aggressive driving and not really keeping this type of stopping distances that you ought to have, especially if you're on your phone or using the radio and stuff like that. So I think following distances is probably one of the biggest things that I didn't appreciate until I actually took the classes. Probably the next one, and this is kind of related to that, is understanding that your braking distance is actually worse if you're empty than if you're full. And that's counterintuitive to me. I don't think I would have necessarily thought that until they actually took the training and realized that your truck is designed to be loaded and those brakes grab more if they're loaded. And so if I had not taken that testing and I just gone out and started driving silage truck, I think I would have been under the misunderstanding that I can stop more quickly if I'm empty and maybe I'm going faster. Maybe I'm not leaving as much space. But I think that's one thing that I really learned out of the CDL training that I probably wouldn't have learned as quickly if I was just going right on and driving farm trucks. Number 5 or let's say number 4 would be the understanding the air brake systems. Like I said, when I got my bus, I never used an air brake system before. I kind of learned the basics. I understood that you had to let it charge up and that and there was a cutout and stuff like that, but like how to test for leakage, how to like test your warning system, all that kind of stuff. I didn't know any of that until I took the classes. And I'm guessing, and I don't want to make too generalized statements, but I'm guessing most farm truckers probably don't get a real thorough training on the air brake systems, nor are they probably doing as good of a job of inspecting those systems. And I think also when you're in it's the heat of the season, you're chopping, you're trying to get done, rain's coming. Are you really stopping to really look at that? Are you getting repairs done? There probably isn't time. You can't wait to take it to a mechanic. And if you don't have the skills yourself, maybe some of those problem areas get unaddressed. And those can obviously be dangerous for the driver as well as those on the road with the driver. Number 5 would be just the importance of scanning for traffic and watching traffic and just being aware of your surroundings. I think you can kind of learn this in truck, just driving, but I think you really understand sort of the math and the science behind it when you do the training. It really became obvious to me when we were doing the roundabouts training. We have a lot of roundabouts in Wisconsin, and going through and watching and making sure that cars weren't pulling up alongside you. I had that happen when I was going through La Crosse. Some of the roundabouts, semis are supposed to have the right of way through roundabouts. I had cars pulling up alongside me, and I had to really be vigilant about that. So I appreciated that part of the CDL training. And I think lastly would be just the aspect of defensive driving. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that you take away from going through the process of getting your CDL is how incumbent it is upon you as the driver, not just to be driving safe yourself, to be really watching around you, watching signs, watching cars, looking way, way ahead of you, anticipating hazards. And if you're not doing those things, even if you're doing everything right, if you don't anticipate hazards and you run into someone, it's on you as the driver. That I think is something that probably isn't something that comes naturally to you If you're just driving a farm truck, and just in talking to people, I definitely get the impression that they feel, like I said, they're aggressive, and they almost sometimes feel like they're entitled to have the road. And if you're sharing the road with trucks, farm trucks or otherwise, give them space, but just be mindful of the fact that I think farm trucks, especially silage trucks, can tend to be on the aggressive side, and could use some additional defensive driving training. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. I want to share a story before I wrap up here, and it's very enlightening. So last night I was at church. We had confirmation for one of my boys, and a family behind me that I know, mom kind of just started carrying on a conversation with me, and she had seen some of my videos about getting my driver's license and some of the videos I had about this ag exemption. What's very interesting is I don't think she grew up on a farm, but she married a guy that is part of a very large dairy farm operation in our area, and I think they have 4 kids. I think their oldest son is working on the farm, and in fact is driving truck for the farm. And they were standing side by side, and mom was talking to me, and kind of sharing how she has those same concerns for her boys and the other guys that are driving, that they're out there and they don't really have adequate training. She had heard about that crash involving the 17-year-old kid, and she was sort of sharing with me that she kind of agreed that it would make good sense for them to get their CDLs, or to have some sort of training available for those who are going to be driving farm trucks, even if they're not getting their CDL. And her son, who was listening, definitely he interjected and said, "I'm a much safer, much better driver than those with CDLs," and maybe he is. I don't know. I've never seen him drive. I know he's been driving for a while. He's like, "Oh, I've been driving out in the field since I was how old?" And that may be true. And like I said, there's plenty of skills that you have to be able to drive truck out in the field, chasing the choppers, hauling manure, all that you probably don't get. I know you don't get in the CDL training. But I don't know that necessarily translates into being a safer driver once you're out of the field, out on the road, and sharing the traffic with everyone else. And if I had to guess, I would imagine that he probably falls into that category of sort of an aggressive driver. That's just me. But anyway, it was just very interesting to have the sort of the mom and the son have very different perspectives on this, because this issue affects them directly. This is what they do. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. I just wanted to kind of share my thoughts a little bit about that, give people an opportunity to chime in. Feel free to leave comments if you have feelings one way or another. Maybe you think I'm full of it, whatever. But feel free to leave a comment below. I like to hear from people, like to get different people's perspective. If you have specific examples, let me know. If you'd like more information, check out my website. It's farmandtruckinjury.com. That's more geared if you or someone you know has actually been involved in an accident involving trucking or farming. But I'd love to hear from people. Send me a comment, send me a message, DM me if you want. My contact information is always in the description. I like to hear from people, and you can catch me kind of wherever you want. So I'm on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, wherever you like to, get your videos, get your content. I'm probably there. And so find me there, follow me. And if I see you, I'll follow you back. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be putting more videos out in the coming weeks. So I look forward to having these kinds of conversations, and maybe I'll talk to some of you. Maybe someone out there wants to have a conversation, do an interview with me. I'm always open to that. So appreciate you watching, and until next time, everyone, have a good one.